Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Bonjour tout le monde. Merci de nous rejoindre ce soir. For those listening in right now, we are going to wait a few more minutes to start, but I'll use this time to share some meeting procedures while we wait for a few more people to tune in. For tonight, we do expect this meeting to be about 25 to 30 minutes. So we hope we won't take up too much of your time. And for those watching, we do want to say thank you. We're very appreciative of everyone who's able to tune in and watch tonight. We will be delivering this presentation in English due to our time constraints. However, our slides will also be displayed in French, and all of this content is available in French on our website at nation.on.ca/consultations. Nous ferons cette présentation en anglais à cause des contraintes de temps. Cependant, nos diapos s'afficheront également en français et tout ce contenu est disponible en français sur notre site web à nation.on.ca/consultation. For those familiar with our usual consultation process, we really love the ability to meet people in person in their communities, usually in the closest school or arena, and to really sit down one-on-one and show you the maps for your property and talk about the potential hazards in your area, and also talk to you about where you've seen flooding and erosion on your property. Obviously, we haven't been able to get together in large groups for some time now, which is why we're delivering some of these updates online. We have found, though, that a lot more people have been able to join us virtually, so we're hoping that the convenience is still welcome. For questions that you might have tonight and in the weeks to come, we have a couple options for you. Your first option is to drop a message in the question and answer tab on your screen. Either someone from our team will respond to you in the chat with an announcement and link you up with the information you need, or we will try and answer your questions at the end of our presentation. The other option, which will be more personal, is to connect with us directly after the presentation. You can send us an email or call our office, and Shannon from our team will coordinate a meeting time that works best for you, either online or in person. When making the request, if you could provide us with some of the questions you might have, we'll make sure that the right person from our team will be available to meet with you. For logistic purposes tonight, we have two presenters from South Nation Conservation Authority, myself, John Messman, and I'm joined by my colleague, Allison McDonald, and we will be delivering our presentation through this Microsoft Teams live event. We are recording this presentation as well, and we'll upload it onto nation.on.ca/consultations, as well as posting it on our YouTube channel tomorrow. For this meeting, we will be providing some information on our organization, on natural hazards within this area, specifically floodplain and riverine erosion. We will also share some information on how the study was completed for the Bear Brook, McWilliams Creek, and Elian-Reginbald Creek, and what this might mean if you're looking to develop or build in these particular areas, as well as show you the draft maps for the study area. I do want to note up front that this mapping exercise is not new. The entire study area was also previously mapped in the 1980s, and development within this floodplain is already regulated by the Conservation Authority and is already contained within the City of Ottawa's zoning bylaws. As a general rule in practice, we only update these maps at the request of our municipal partners, generally due to development pressures. These mapping updates help the Conservation Authority and the city determine how water moves through the landscape now in current conditions and what hazards currently exist. This exercise does not take into account future development, but note that as a result of these studies, all future development must ensure that there's no net impact to the system. New construction, for example, would need to be reviewed and approved by both the Conservation Authority and the city to ensure that the floodplain does not change and that neighboring properties are not affected and that people and property remain safe. In this particular area, the new study was able to use new topographical data and field surveys and state-of-the-art models to help understand how water moves through this area during a flood event. For the most part, the mapped area is very similar to the 1980 study, with some slight decreases in the size of the floodplain, and no new homes were identified to be at risk. These resources are available online, as I mentioned earlier, nation.on.ca/consultations, including these draft maps that you're welcome to view. There's also a link to an interactive property map where you can enter your address and take a look at your property. And please note that during the presentation tonight, we will not be showing individual properties, rather looking at different areas within the study area. Questions on your individual property can be best addressed through one-on-one meetings that we're looking forward to over the next few weeks. And with that, just looking at the time, we've got lots of people logged in, so I think we'll get started. So again, welcome everyone, bienvenue à tous to our public meeting for updated natural hazard mapping for the Bear Brook and tributaries within the City of Ottawa. Everyone who owns property within or adjacent to the area in our draft maps would have received a letter from us a few weeks ago with an invitation to attend this meeting or to speak directly to our staff. The draft maps were also included with these letters and, as mentioned, are online. And if you didn't receive a letter and are on this call, don't worry, you're still welcome to participate and, of course, ask questions. As I mentioned earlier, there's a question and answer feature in this meeting where you can drop your questions in for others to see. We'll try and respond to some of these as we go along, and then we'll take care of the rest of them at the end of the presentation. I'm going to kick off our meeting with a few comments on our organization, the South Nation Conservation Authority, just to give you a bit of an overview on who we are and what we do, so you can better understand why we were contracted by our municipal partners to complete these sorts of projects. Once I'm done, I'll pass the hot seat over to my colleague Allison to explain a bit about natural hazards, why and how we map them, and how we work with property owners and municipalities to ensure that future construction in and near these areas are reviewed and approved so that they can protect people and property and, of course, support good, safe, and sustainable development. I'll start with a quick map of our jurisdiction on the screen. We are one of Ontario's 36 conservation authorities, and we operate under provincial legislation called the Conservation Authorities Act. But we also deliver other work through agreements with provincial ministries and our own municipalities to deliver environmental services through other pieces of legislation like the Clean Water Act, among others. In our region of Eastern Ontario, we work for 16 different municipalities, including the City of Ottawa, and our jurisdiction is around the South Nation River and its tributaries, beginning near the headwaters in Brockville and ending near Plantagenet, where the river empties into the Ottawa River. You'll also notice on the map that our jurisdiction extends to both the St. Lawrence and Ottawa rivers, and these are recent developments over the last few years where we've extended our jurisdiction to these areas at the request of our partners to deliver environmental services like floodplain mapping and flood forecasting. Which means that though our work as watershed managers is to deliver environmental services for our municipalities, you can expect that one of the most important parts of our jobs is to protect people and property from these hazards like flooding, erosion, and landslides. Through this, we do deliver several services on behalf of our partners, including septic system inspections, drinking water source protection, while also operating 8 different dams and other water control structures, and managing flood forecasting program to predict and respond to flooding events. The photo we included on this screen is from the area between the village of Castleman and the former village of Lemieux, where significant erosion occurs due to the presence of later clay soil in that area. The clay soil there can turn from solid to liquid in a matter of seconds, and that area has been susceptible to large-scale landslides for centuries and has seen some significant events in the 70s and 90s. This hazard area was mapped by us and is regulated by us to limit development in the area. In the 90s, we also worked to relocate the former village of Lemieux and were successful in moving all of the former village residents and their homes just 1 year before the landslide occurred in this photo. I should note that for today's presentation on the Bear Brook, that no presence of later clay soil was found in the study area, and for the most part, the soils in this area were sand and silty clay. Like the landslide areas, our staff also work to map floodplains and erosion hazard in other areas identified by our municipalities with development pressure to ensure that whatever new buildings are approved are being built in the safest way possible. When our staff review development files and proposals, and Allison will share some examples in a bit, we're not looking to restrict development like we would, not always rather, looking to restrict development like we would in the Castleman to Lemieux area. Our staff are working with the property owner, the developer, and the city to find ways to approve projects when it's safe by recommending flood-proofing measures, different locations for buildings, studies to investigate appropriate measures, and of course, safe construction techniques. And though we want to provide support for good projects, we have to be clear in saying that this can be very circumstantial. There's not always a one-size-fits-all approach to approvals, and this is why permission is required through a permit before work can proceed. There will be instances where what is proposed to be built really just would not be safe, but there are many scenarios where proposals might be able to proceed or may need to be altered before they proceed. We want to make sure that your development or whatever you're going to be doing on your property is going to protect you and your investment. We also do complete environmental monitoring programs that help us report on watershed conditions and environmental health. I mention this because our planning and regulations team also use this data to make informed decisions when reviewing development proposals. When we know that an area is in poor environmental health, we do our best to work with our partners and the affected property owner to help improve the environment through restoration projects. On this, I do want to share a reminder that we're very proud of the restoration work that we do every year. We do rely on fundraising and financial project partnerships to help fund this work. It's through these partnerships with government, academia, and industries where we're able to work together to improve the local environment. And community stewardship and outreach is an important part of this work. We also deliver a number of different environmental stewardship programs through agreements with our municipalities, including things like roadside tree programs, water quality improvement programs for farmers. And these projects can help provide cost share funding for projects that improve water quality. We also have an ash tree replacement program in the City of Ottawa and a free woodlot advisory service for rural woodlot owners. And probably our most popular program being our tree planting program, which is often what people know us most for. Our tree planting program is now funded by the federal government and private property owners that participate. We're able to offer site prep, tending, spraying, and tree planting for as low as 25 cents per conifer and 55 cents per deciduous tree with larger orders. And on this, should you have any questions or if you're interested, feel free to reach out at any time. Over the last 2 years, we've been setting some record tree planting goals. With this spring, we have over 230,000 trees that will be going into the ground this spring. So we're really looking forward to that. The final slide for our overview, we wanted to mention that we are a public land trust and we work to protect significant natural spaces in Eastern Ontario. And we've been acquiring land since 1970 through partial purchase and donation. Many of these properties are also acquired for flood mitigation, including areas to construct berms and dikes, and some areas were acquired to keep them from being developed. But much of our land is forested and contains provincially significant wetlands. We do own over 13,000 acres of forested land and operate about 15 day-use parks called conservation areas. And I also wanted to mention that most of our parks are actually on land that was donated to us by people to protect and conserve their family's natural legacy. For more information, check out our land donation program section of our webpage. And with that, I will pass the microphone virtually off to Allison to start us off on our natural hazard mapping updates for tonight. Thanks.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. This is Allison McDonald. I'm team lead for the approvals department at South Nation. And we're going to provide a little bit of background information on natural hazards and natural hazard mapping in general before we jump into some of the more specific maps that we have prepared tonight for the Bear Brook. So moving forward. So what are natural hazards, just so we're all on the same page? It includes areas that we might have heard of, something called flooding, floodplains. So there are areas that are prone to flooding, but we also have areas around rivers and water courses that may have what we call unstable slopes. So we may see landsliding or erosion or meandering streams. So these are all natural hazards. And tonight we're talking about those natural hazards that are specifically associated with the Bear Brook and its tributaries. The mapping that conservation authorities prepare for these hazards is used by both conservation authorities and municipalities and is also available to the public. So South Nation maps these hazards on behalf of municipalities to help protect new development and ensure people and property are safe. We use provincial guidelines to do this, and we use standards that will ensure mapping meets best practices and is also consistent across the province of Ontario. We are working with the City of Ottawa to prioritize the hazard mapping in areas where we know there is existing development or where development pressure is expected in the future. This helps us to better plan for things like expansion areas and also provide better information to those who live or work in these areas. Now, South Nation has mapped many floodplains within our watershed, and our team does use a consistent process and the most up-to-date information and technology possible to develop these maps. We start with broad assessments of background data and usually include things like land use, topography, water flow, and precipitation. We then identify the important types of infrastructure. So this would be things like culverts or bridges. And we want to get the most accurate information possible on the size and elevation of these structures. In some cases, these culverts may be on private property, and if so, we would request permission to access these structures. If we do not have permission, we would use a conservative but educated estimate for these structures. We also use our elevation information that we have, like LiDAR, which is essentially a very detailed and accurate topography. And this supports our modeling. So our model will take into account all the information we have, including stream flows, precipitation, and we create a hazard projection, essentially. Our engineers will then complete a detailed review of our modeling output and confirm that the site-specific details are accounted for. The resulting maps are reviewed by technical teams and the municipality before preparing them for public consultation. So there's quite a few steps that goes through, including modeling, including high-level mapping, but also on the ground verification where we can. We basically do all we can to make this the best possible version of maps that we can provide. So next slide. Once we approve these maps, we use them to review development applications. And this is obviously a very important step, kind of where the rubber hits the road. These maps become the way that we are able to review development applications and ensure that people and property are going to be safe in these areas. Our regulated area mapping contains both natural hazards and a buffer, and we're going to get into that a little bit later in the presentation. If you received a letter from us, that means that a portion of your property is within what we call the regulated area. And really what this means is that it's important for you to contact South Nation in the future if you're thinking about moving forward with development on your property. This includes site alteration on the property. And our office is always happy to work with landowners to review what hazards may or may not be present on the site, what needs to be confirmed, and the steps that'll have to be taken to ensure that the work you want to do on your property is safe.
Thanks, Allison. The model and analysis we use when mapping floodplain and erosion hazards are based on the regulatory standards established by the province of Ontario, which means that when we're looking at floodplains, we're modeling and mapping a storm event that could create what's called a major 100-year flood, also known as the 100-year flood event standard. This rain and flood event would have a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. For erosion hazards, which is a more permissive regulation, they're mapped based on the 100-year erosion rate standard, which means we're looking at the average annual rate of erosion or recession in a given year over a 100-year time span. And for both of these analysis, the use of radar sensing topographical information that we call LiDAR has really helped refine the accuracy of this data. After floodplains are mapped, the regulated area along a river or stream is generally determined by adding a 15-meter buffer or an allowance on top of the hazard, which is on land. Erosion hazard mapping will not always have an additional allowance added to the regulation area, as these areas are mapped a little bit more conservatively with access considerations included. The Conservation Authority may grant permission for proposed work in a natural hazard area if it's demonstrated that the proposed work will not affect the control of flooding or erosion. Okay, so Allison and I are going to make a few comments on the next series of maps that we'll put on the screen. If you have questions as we look at the maps or on something we've said, please feel free to add your question into the question tab or type something out in the chat, and we'll go through some of those questions together in the next few minutes. This is a map on the screen of the full study area for the Bear Brook and the McWilliams and Ellie and Reginbald Creeks, showing the regulation area that contains the floodplain and erosion hazards. So the blue line on the map in the center of the area is basically the center of the streams that were studied. To help position yourself, the double line in the middle of the screen is Highway 417. On the right side or east side of the map, you can see Limoges Road. On the left side or west side, we can see Hunt Club, Conroy, Leacham roads. The full length of the stream studied is about 67 kilometers, and our team also surveyed about 31 bridges and culverts through the area. This map shows property in the study area where both floodplain and erosion hazards exist. So when determining the so-called regulation area, which is going to be that area where a permit is going to be required, where we want to make sure that you contact the CA before proceeding with your work, we are looking at both the floodplain and the erosion hazard. So the greatest of whichever hazard is present is going to determine the regulated area. In this map, you can see floodplain area in light blue near the stream and into the farm field above. But below, you can see the floodplain did not overtop the stream banks in this area. This is likely because they're more steep. However, you will see an orange erosion hazard line, which means that there is a risk of erosion here. And we would want to make sure that whatever is built in this area is done so appropriately, if in fact it is safe to do so. This is, of course, why it's important to emphasize that not all areas and projects will be the same. Where the area is largely floodplain, development is going to be more restrictive. Where development might be proposed in a buffer, it may be more permissive if several factors like safe access can be achieved. Where if it's an erosion hazard, depending on the proposal, a study may be required to determine the true extent of the hazard and if and how something could safely be built. And so these are the sorts of discussions that would occur during the permitting process, and of course, when you reach out to our office.
I think these maps are a great example of how we've been able to use updated information to get a really good picture of what's actually going on along this watercourse. So it really shows how at this point we can differentiate between these different natural hazards. We can be very specific about which one is affecting the property and what types of studies or requirements there would be. So I think it's great to see this map broken down this way and be able to show people clearly what natural hazard they would be dealing with if they wanted to move forward with some kind of development.
So the next slide is going to show the exact same area map, but we've removed the aerial imagery and have instead displayed the LiDAR, or this hillshade topography mapping, to show you the difference in elevation in this area. And as you can expect, you can kind of see the steepness and change in elevation just outside the bottom portion of this floodplain where that erosion hazard is going to exist. And I wonder, Allison, if you have anything else to comment on this map.
Yeah, I think you did a great job describing it, John, but I mean, I think the big thing to remember is that both floodplain and erosion hazards can exist. We have this, great up-to-date mapping where we can really pull it apart when someone wants to talk about their specific property. In both cases, a permit would be required, but the requirements to support development would be very different depending on what we're dealing with on the site. But this is hopefully going to clear up to a lot of residents how these two things interact and how they can be different depending on what portion of the Bear Brook you're on.
Great, that's awesome. Thanks, Allison. Now, earlier we noted that this study was an update to mapping that was completed in the 1980s. So we wanted to show you an example of how the floodplain and erosion hazard is now better defined due to some of the modern techniques that we've used to improve the accuracy of these maps. For the most part, all of the floodplains are now better defined, and ultimately the draft maps do suggest that less parcels of land are included in the floodplain and less residential dwellings are now included in the draft maps. Previously, there were 27, and now there are 7 that remain contained in this floodplain. And so, Allison, I wonder if you'd like to comment on some of those reasons why the mapping has changed between the two studies.
Yeah, so I mentioned LiDAR, which is a fancy type of aerial imagery that was flown involving lasers and all kinds of things that are better explained by an engineer. But what I do know is LiDAR is something that's helped us to really refine the location of the floodplain in this area. We have been able to kind of show how the floodplain does follow the sharper ravines within this section. I know there's still erosion hazards associated with those ravines, but the floodplain itself is far more accurate. And I think you can see that just by the side-by-side images there. Essentially, we're talking about more detailed topography. We've been able to show exactly where this floodwater is going to stay if we reach that 1 in 100 year event. And we do use LiDAR for more applications than just this. It's a fantastic tool that's really enabled us to make a lot better decisions and understand the way water and other things move on the landscape. So we've also had the benefit of obviously a lot more sophisticated modeling. So this original image, the original floodplain, dates back to the 1980s when these floodplain maps were originally created. And we now have much better software, as you can imagine, and it provides a much more accurate version of how this water moves on the landscape. So when you combine just the better imagery and topography with the better ability to model these kinds of flows, it really allows us to make an accurate, but I really want to stress this, still conservative estimate of the floodplain in this area.
All right, so we have 3 more maps to share with you. I just took a quick look at the question tab. This might be over the next few slides areas where you might have questions, so please feel free to drop those in there so we can take a look once we're done. The first map on the screen is showing the headwaters or the source or beginning of the Bear Brook, which will include several small streams and municipal drains that are going to combine basically to form the Bear Brook. The left-hand side of the screen or west, we can see Bank Street and Conroy Road. On the right side or east, we can see Russell Road and Boundary Road on top. And at the bottom, we can see Mitch Owens Road. This is an area where we noticed the mapped floodplain did decrease in size a little bit, as Allison mentioned during this update. Again, mostly due to the new accuracy of our tools. And for the most part, the predominant hazard in this area as a result is riverine erosion. So I wonder, Allison, if you have any comments to share on this map.
Yeah, this is, as you mentioned, a great example of how we've really confirmed that the floodplain remains within that channel. But more than that, we've been able to give a much better estimate of where the slope stability or erosion hazards may be in this area. So although the hazard and regulated area has not increased much, it's much more accurate than it was previously in the 1980s. And as we know, this is an area that may in the future be subject to development, and there are many folks who live and work and play in this area. So I think being able to provide that updated, assurance that the floodplain is fairly contained, but that there are some erosion hazards to be considered, it's a good update and provides a lot of good new information for people who live here.
Okay, so next we have this middle section of the study area. On the left-hand side of the map or west, we can see Piperville Road meeting with Boundary Road. On the right side or east, we can see McNeely Road and Hoovelmans Road. On the left side, you can also see that connection to the Mareblood Bog, which of course is one of the largest and most significant wetland ecosystems in our region. It's quite large, over 3,500 hectares. It's quite old, over 7,000 years old to be specific, and most of that area is managed by the National Capital Commission. This is one area, though, in terms of the study that really didn't change too much from the one that was completed in the 1980s. The vast majority of this area is primarily that 100-year floodplain with very little to no erosion hazard present. We do have a McKinnon's Creek connection in this area and a few small streams contributing. And for anyone familiar with this area, you'll know it's incredibly flat. It's actually the flattest area within this study. And this is generally where you'll see, fields of water each spring after the spring melt. If we were to measure from one end of the area to the other, just in the middle of this map, which is about 5 kilometers on average, the drop in elevation is only 2 meters. And so this is obviously the main reason why this floodplain is so large, and part of the reason why this land has also been predominantly farmed for quite some time. The sandy clay soils and seasonal flooding can create some productive farmland. And I wonder, Allison, if you have any comments to share on this map.
Yeah, so because the area is very agricultural, as you mentioned, it's important to mention, I think, that farming activities are not really affected by our regulations. So people that are farming in the area have been dealing with it being wet in the spring for a long time, but also dealing with, more serious flooding at in different years. But our regulation wouldn't affect farming activity in general. People can continue to use their land to farm, but things like buildings and structures, that's where we'd want to have a conversation with farmers to talk about any kind of development that would happen within this area. But it's very interesting to look at the Bear Brook watershed and see how different it is. The way we've broken up these stretches of the floodplain, you can see it's a completely different picture. But yeah, it's an area that hasn't changed much. We've modeled this, obviously accounting for lots of things that have changed since 1980, but the actual floodplain itself has been remained fairly consistent in this area.
Okay, so in this last view of the study area, which includes a bit of the last map on the left, but of course more zoomed in, we also have that Ellie and Reginbald Creek contributing to this area. There's Russell Road at the bottom of the map, with the right side or east of the map bringing us to that City of Ottawa boundary. And in this area, we have both floodplain and erosion hazard present in most areas, especially on the right where you can see the water course naturally twisting and curving. This sort of natural movement of water is really great to see because it helps slow down the movement of water through the system, which can help limit stream bank erosion. However, some of that map hazard there will be erosion due to the steepness of those banks and that curved configuration of those water courses. And I mean, same thing, Allison. I wonder what comments you can provide on this map.
Yeah, so we looked at this section of the mapping and noted, there are some residents that are currently within this area. It was previously mapped as floodplain as well. But one thing we confirmed through the updated mapping was that there is some areas where safe access is present. And that's something meaning in the time of flooding, residents will be able to safely exit their home using municipal roads. So there's been a few little updates there that I think are positive and give us a better feeling when it comes to managing those who might live currently within or around the natural hazards in the area. And yeah, the meandering streams, the natural curvation within that water course, it's beautiful to see, but it also sometimes presents this erosion hazard over the long term. So that's something we're now, very conscious of and able to kind of map a bit better than we did in the 80s. So I think overall, not too big of a change, but some positive improvements in terms of the accuracy of what we have in this area.
Okay, so here's the point in the presentation. I was hoping that we could turn to some questions, but as I look through what's been submitted, unless I'm missing something, it looks like most of the questions have been answered. So I'll use this time to basically prompt anyone. If you have a question either on the permitting process, on how we mapped the floodplains, on what tools we used, or anything specific to the last few maps that we talked about, if you could submit those questions, we can answer them now. But of course, like we said earlier, you're welcome to follow up afterwards. We have a number of meetings booked over the next few weeks with people, and so we're looking forward, obviously, to talking about how this mapping might affect your particular property.
Yeah, as John mentioned at the beginning, we really enjoy the opportunity to meet with people in the community. So we know this isn't the ideal format for having conversations. It's a great opportunity to present information to people, but if you have a specific question or you just want to talk through what this means for you, we're happy to have those conversations with people. It's the better part of what we get to do in our work is hear from the community and talk to you guys about what this work means. So I guess there's still no questions in the live chat, no new questions. So we have heard from quite a few people in advance in the meeting. We're able to kind of deal with some of the questions early on, which has been great. But
I'll also take another moment just to remind everyone about that interactive map feature that's on our website. It's right under where the tab where you can access those draft maps, but it says interactive property map. If you go there, if you click on it, you can access these maps through a web browser. You can put in your property or a property that's of interest to you, and you can zoom in basically to the property extent so you can see where these maps or where this mapping falls on a property of interest. And that might help you, I think, in positioning yourselves, orienting yourself on the map to see where exactly this area is located. And so if more questions come in, we're happy to answer them. But in the meantime, I've just put up on screen some project contact information from the City of Ottawa with everyone. We're of course happy to facilitate any questions or comments that you might have, but of course note that some of them may be best addressed with the city, especially if they're about past, ongoing, or future development in the area. And Amanda Lynch has been a great resource and contact to have, so we did want to share her email with you all. And of course, staff from the City of Ottawa have also been online tonight watching the presentation, so they'll be familiar with the concepts we've covered in case there are any city-specific questions after the presentation. And so, like I said earlier, we are scheduling one-on-ones. We can do this in person, virtual, phone, whatever works best for you in the next few weeks. If you could just send that email to Shannon or info@nation.on.ca and we can connect you with the right person. As long as you can provide some of the details of the questions that you're hoping to ask, we can make sure that the right person from our team is available, be that an engineer, a planner, someone from the city, hydrogeologist, etc. And like Allison mentioned, we're happy to come out in the community. We're happy to set up a meeting date closer to you if that works. Just feel free to let us know. And I wonder if we can make sure, I'm looking at the tab, I'm seeing, oh, I think I just saw a new one. Okay, so also we have a new question. This is great. So the question is, how will these maps or draft maps of flood and erosion affect farm buildings? So example, barns, run-ins where livestock graze in these floodplains, for example. Okay, well, I can, I'll take this one. I think this is submitted by Birch. I hope I said that right. For sure, and I mean, like Allison said earlier, Birch, for the most part, farming or agriculture activities are not impacted by these mapping. Where you might run into a scenario where we will want to have a conversation is for new buildings, right? If you wanted to build a new building in the floodplain or the erosion hazard, we'll definitely want to have a conversation. Of course, there are certain exceptions and different avenues that we can go to make something work for you. There are, especially if it's in an area that might be more permissive, you know, we're going to want to make sure that the building has flood proofing measures, that it's far enough away from the creek, that it's far enough away from the hazard that your property or yourself isn't going to be at risk.
Yeah, and sorry, John, I just lost connectivity there for a second, but that's absolutely correct. We do, you know, there is zoning requirements from the City of Ottawa, so you know, you need to take a look at both pieces of legislation will apply, but these are the kind of scenarios where it's great if you have plans for the property to come in and chat with us early, and we can, you know, sweep away that confusion and make sure that it's clear to you what you can and can't do. And obviously, if there's an area outside of the floodplain or outside of the hazard where you can build, that's our preference and everyone's preference, and probably your preference too. And if we're looking at that buffer area, that's where often there's a lot of room to look at flood proofing and things like that. So.
Okay, so I did see a question on the difference between some of these hazards, and I wonder if I can just pull up on the screen the example we had earlier, just up front. Actually, you know what? This one might be good. The question, Allison, is can you highlight the creeks in blue within the map and show us where the actual floodplain is? And there was a question on, you know, where is the floodplain hazard within the regulated area? I think this slide might be a good one to use to speak to that.
Yeah, so it's super tiny on my screen. Hopefully it's big enough on everyone else's screen too, but you're going to see the floodplain as the blue shaded area. And then you're going to see the regulated area, the buffer, 15 meters away from that is a thin blue line, I guess you could say. So I know there's a little confusion interpreting these maps, and I'm going to be completely honest, even after 10, 11 years working in this, every single property is often different. So that's why we prefer to have kind of one-on-one conversations with people and walk through it together. But yeah, if you take a look at the map that's up on the screen, you can see floodplain shown in shaded blue, erosion hazard regulation limit in yellow, and the floodplain regulation limit in blue. So it's something we try our hardest to simplify by saying if you're in a regulated area, it's a yellow flag, I guess you could say, for a conversation. And we like, as we've reiterated, I think a few times now, we don't mind taking the time to sit down with you on your own property and talk about what it means. And I think that's probably the easiest and clearest way to have these kinds of conversations, because there is a little bit of background information to understand. And now that we have, like we were talking about, this up-to-date modeling and topography, it's a lot easier to show people what their property looks like and what we see. So hopefully that's helpful. Looking at this image breaks it down. And if you're still feeling like it's a little confusing to determine, maybe send us an email and we can work on getting some customized maps for a meeting with you in the near future.
And I'll just point out one more thing on this map. Usually the mouse works, so if you see it, great. But it was just a question of where is the river in this map. And so if you can see my cursor top left, it comes down
There it is, yeah.
through here. Right, and so this is a great example of where the floodplain might be contained within that, riverine, where there's a slope, it's contained within the channel, but to the north, or the top of the map rather, it's quite flat. And so that floodplain is spilling out into the field, but on the bottom side, we have a steeper valley or channel. And so most of the floodwaters are going to be contained in there. But of course, we have some erosion hazard because of that steepness at the bottom. I'm just gonna look through, Allison, Shannon, anyone else. If I've missed a question, please let us know, just so I don't skip over any of the submissions here.
I think that's it. I'm seeing now I see the question about the creeks, but and the one about agriculture. I think that's it.
All right, well, I guess that brings us to the end of our presentation. Our organization is celebrating 75 years of conservation this year, and of course, we welcome everyone to check out our website at nation.on.ca/anniversary to learn more or to participate in our 75-kilometer challenge this year. And for more information on updated natural hazard maps in your area, please visit nation.on.ca/consultations. And again, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Merci de votre attention. Have a great night. Bonne soirée.